So first of all, thank you for taking the time to.
Thank you for having me. Such an honor.
No, it's wonderful because, I will not introduce you too much. I'll let you do a little bit talk about yourself. But just as a background, obviously you started as a medical profession, and I don't think there's any Ivy League university left which you didn't go to, and then evolved into a more of the wellness and health field, but very different way than a practicing doctor. So just tell us a little bit about how your early childhood journey made you think you want to be a doctor, and then we'll get into what made you do the pivot.
Yeah, unlike a lot of South Asians, my parents were not both doctors, but they definitely told me how coveted being a physician is in India. Like, you can only be a doctor if you're the top 1% of, the educated population. And it's kind of true in America as well. And so I always knew that there was like a academic challenge around it. But I think seeing my family go through the diabetes journey, where they basically developed very severe diabetes quickly, a few years after moving to America, even though they looked thin and healthy. And that made me really interested in nutrition, which is what I pursued as an undergrad. And then after nutrition, I said, well, I want to know why this nutrition affects the body. And that's why I went to medical school. And it's a long journey, as you know, here in the US and all over the world. But the thing that really interested me is that you can change someone's outcome by changing the way they eat, the way they live. Before we started recording, I was telling you about how a lot of countries that still live in almost what you would call more rural way, they often have better immunity and better gut health than the modern times. And I found that fascinating. I'm like, what are we doing wrong with the way we eat or the way we live, or the way we process stress or whatever it may be? There's something we're doing wrong. And that was, I think, the most enticing thing. Of course, after finishing my medical journey and going on this path of success, what we consider success, I found myself in a place where I felt very unsuccessful, because I felt stressed and anxious, and I knew my mood and hormones, my gut health was off, but when I went to get it checked, it was all normal. Oh, you're a mom, you're a doctor, you're practicing, you're stressed. And I knew there was so much more to that. So I decided that what success meant to everyone on the outside, at least in my field, was not what success felt to me. And I wasn't going to be able to continue in the way that I was practicing in that realm. And so that's when I kind of dove into nutrition. That's when the internet was just starting to flourish. And so I used it as an outlet in the beginning, just to speak to people about the nutrition journey and the reset that I was doing to get myself out of a dark place. Because I thought, if I can get myself out of a dark place, I have to share this information with others.
Yeah, no, first of all, thank you for coming to the internet, because that's what we do, so it helps us. But more importantly, I did watch and read about what you said, that you're getting more and more questioning yourself in what one would consider any age a great profession, right? Everybody aspires to be in that position of being a doctor and doing things to help, but feeling as if you're not able to be, fulfilled or satisfied. And that must have been a hard phase, right? Because I'm sure a lot of doctors go through it, but then you sleep off and say, okay, let me get up and get back to the kind of the treadmill and do that again, right?
And you're motivated. I feel that the prestige and money motivation can only go so far. You have to feel good in your brain, in your body, to be, in my mind, to be truly successful. And on a daily basis, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night because I was anxious about what happened during the day, what would happen the next day. I had young children, so I kind of forego. I just thought, I don't have time to take care of myself because I have to be this super mom and super person because that's what society was telling me. So I kind of stopped doing the things I used to do to cope with anxiety and stress. And I stopped exercising, and I would eat late at night and do my work late at night. And all these things that now I realize in retrospect, like it was snowballing into this situation where I talk about in my book that I got into this huge car accident, and I had to be off of work for about a week while I was recovering, and my car was completely totaled. And it made me really think, what am I doing? I'm not doing what I want to do with my life, and I need to make a big change. And it was that day that I decided to make a big change.
So the accident in some form actually gave you that time to reflect.
It's like a wake-up call. Yeah, because sometimes something's wrong, but we're so busy in our heads that we don't even have time, or it's too hard to break the pattern until the pattern is broken already, and you have to kind of take a step back. So.
Yeah, and I think it's that, what they call your inner, instinct or voice. And a lot of time we brush it off because we think it's too soft, right? Because then you go into hard facts, like quitting your job,
it's
a profession you've worked for probably 15, 20 years of your life, and
I talk about this as uncovering your gut feeling, because now that I realize that our gut and our brain are so connected, I realize that a lot of us have a gut sense for things, but we can't hear it because there's so much noise, and sometimes just pulling back the layers. And that's something that would help people in their mental health situation so much today, is listening to.
So tell me more about, because it is the gut aspect of your own wellness, right? It's a pretty important, but it's also quite misunderstood, I think. And so tell us more about
in medicine, probably you and probably everybody listening or watching, the way you feel right now is actually a conglomeration of your thoughts, but also the signals that your gut is giving to your brain. Dopamine, serotonin, all these chemicals that we think of, GABA, that makes us tired, makes us happy, makes us anxious, are coming from that gut bacteria. And that's actually the primary source of our feelings and emotions, our mood and our energy levels. And when we're thinking about it that way, then it makes a lot more sense why when you start to improve your health in any ways, you see some clarity, or people go on a vacation and all of a sudden they have clarity in their mind or mood. And a lot of that has to do with the gut bacteria, because that turns over very quickly.
So is that eating related?
It can be eating related. So what happens is at every moment right now, there are gut bacteria that are walkie-talking your immune system and your brain and telling them how to function at this very moment. So if you feel tired, it's because those gut bacteria are telling your brain that. And so it can be a result of inflammation, meaning you ate something bad and your body is inflamed. So it's telling your body, hey, let's slow down a little bit. Let's fix this problem. And so you can imagine it's food related, it's toxin related, alcohol, smoking, it's stress. And a lot of it is chronic inflammation. It's the little hits it's a combination of lack of sleep and poor diet and not exercising and lots of circadian rhythms that kind of result in bad bacteria, or what we term as bacteria that create messenger signals that are negative.
Got it. So I know we can go in this topic a lot, but because I remember last year, I think I had for a month, I had something going on in my stomach, and it was the most horrible thing. It was the entire, and I'm quite active physically, but that shut everything down. And that was when I spoke to somebody, they said, your gut's actually driving everything in your body. When I was in immunology fellowship, they were saying how our immune system depends on the gut bacteria, not our own gut cells, but the gut bacteria that live there, which for direction. And I thought that was so crazy. There's organisms that it's not even part of our body, but they're responsible for all the decisions that are being made on a daily basis about what you feel alert, what you're going to respond to, how inflamed you feel. And that just made more sense in terms of, okay, that's why we get this
nervous feeling in our gut when you're nervous. That's why when your stomach is upset, you kind of feel tired. It kind of goes together. And they knew this thousands of years ago, but now we're learning there's 5 different ways we already know that they communicate. So it's a constant communication.
Got it. So obviously we'll keep going to handle to learn a lot more, because it's a topic I don't think you can know enough, but it's a very critical one. Tell us about the correlation. We've just touched about mental wellness, right? And obviously it's a topic more relevant than any other time. What pandemic has done to everybody, right? The WHO report talks about 10% of the world, probably it's a lot more. From a holistic wellness perspective, right? What are the things you see, are correlated, and maybe maybe a couple of things people can just do, at least being start aware that how one aspect of wellness affects your mental side of things.
It's so interesting, but during the pandemic, we've had a rise of depression of 30%. I mean, that's a huge anxiety. I think it's 26%. We're the unhappiest in the modern world that we have been in 50 years. And so we know that there's something that happened. Part of it is, loss, being ill. But part of it is also the loss of certain fundamental aspects that run our bodies and brains, like this gut-brain connection. And part of that gut-brain connection is circadian rhythms, like the sun and dark cycles. They run our bodies. Our gut bacteria, even though it's deep into our bowels, like it needs input that there is sun and there is darkness to know what to do. They have clocks inside of themselves, but they need to be tuned. And so I think that part of what's happening in the world is that, because we were isolated, a lot of us stayed up late or didn't get sunlight, natural light at all. And we were isolated from people, which lowers your life expectancy by 40% to be isolated, right? It's like smoking cigarettes, loneliness. And then we're asked to work in an environment that's like a 24/7 culture, because it's kind of built up to that at this point with your apps, with your phones and computer. Mm-hmm. And I think that basically it was a perfect storm. And so health, the world events, and our habits were coming to a head. They were saying that fast food chains saw a huge rise in profits during this time because it was kind of safe choice for a lot of people. They knew. Was it
safe, or you feel like it was impulsive? Or
it was impulsive, and it was for us in America. It was they had the infrastructure to do drive-through, to do drop-off, to do delivery.
Right.
Whereas like a small local shop would not have that capability to do that, and so there was a combination of knowing that you could drive in your car and get like a drop-off food, and then of course stress-related. Eating and not having that knowledge or putting it as a priority. We thought, we comfort ourselves with food, and food is often a comforting thing. So there's I think combination of things, but the circadian rhythm piece is so fascinating to me because I don't think people realized that 80% of our body's functions are genes in every single one of our. The thing I think people don't realize is that 80% of the genes in our cells are controlled by circadian rhythm. So it's not like a nice to have light, right? It is a fundamental brain body issue. So we have a circadian center in our brains that get input from our eyes, but then we have cells, clocks in every single one of our cells that kind of have their own self-regulating cycle. And if you don't retune that clock can be broken. It can cause disease. It's basically, we know that circadian disruption is a huge factor in mental health and physical health. So we need those little, things as simple as getting natural light and getting darkness at night has gone from our culture, because now at night we have blaring phones and computers and overhead lights, and we eat late at night. And then in the morning, we're not getting natural light because the light you get from a light indoors is just a fraction of what you actually need. It's maybe 1,000 lux, when a cloudy day is 10,000 lux outside and a sunny day would be 100,000 lux. So you really need that magnitude of input, and that we're not getting that. I think has a lot to do with our mood, our appetite control. We know that it affects inflammation, and the gut health.
Yeah, no, I think those are very valuable, pieces of I would say, very touching the surface. And I think obviously there's a lot there, but a lot of it, I think we don't think about consciously. And when you start thinking about it, right? I just want to shift to a lot of people want to do what you're doing, in a sense that, you're in a profession and you say, I'm going to do something different. And with the power of digitization technology, obviously it's one click away for you to be out there speaking to billions, millions of people, right? But it's not as simple as right? Because starting something is very easy. You start your whatever, website or a channel or a social media channel, but then building it up, sustaining it, and it's a lot of hard work and a lot of stuff. I mean, if you can just share, what were the things in the beginning which were like, I'm sure there were nights you're like, what the hell have I done, right? I mean, I quit
many and lots of failures, right?
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing that I realize is that a lot of us live in a life where we're afraid to fail, so we don't sing in public, or we don't put ourselves out there. We don't tell the person that we think is really great, that we don't call them and tell them. You're embarrassed, you're worried about judgment, you're worried about failure. Like, what if that person doesn't feel the same way about you, or what if people make fun of you? But when you really think about fundamentally, when I started to fail and I started to be made fun of or embarrassed, and which is all the fears that we had, it wasn't so bad. In fact, it felt freeing. And I think that was a thing that I didn't expect at all. It felt like, wow, I can survive that. Like, I don't need people to always give me approval, because there's so many people who got value from this, that the people that didn't like it felt bad in the first, few times. And then you get stronger, just like you get stronger with anything. Like when you exercise or you're lifting weights, it's just the same thing. And I think if we lived in a way, if we would do the things that we really wanted to do without the fear of failure and judgment, imagine the things we would do. And I thought back to my life, and I thought, how many times did I not take that risk because I was afraid of, what would happen in case it didn't work out. And part of it was the immigrant child's burden, because you don't want to make too many mistakes, because your parents, my parents worked so hard to bring me here. I didn't want to fail too many times, and I didn't want them to think that I wasn't doing a good job, or myself to think that I wasn't working hard. But then after that, I was like, it's just society. It's just your own inner workings. And now that we're here on, in the modern world, if you're just willing to take that risk, the world's like open, as you know.
Yeah. I mean, I see that a lot of the audience which follows you and engages with you is all over the world, and probably 90% of them probably will never meet you or see you, right. But yet, the conversations, the borders are no longer valid. And I think very powerful thing you said about failure, right? Because they say that the biggest regret you'll have is not failing.
Yeah.
And a lot of people just don't want to go down that path, and then the regret they have is, oh my God, I never tried anything. Yeah,
and if you look at, like, it's so dismal, but Stoicism, and they talk about at your funeral or at your deathbed, what do you want them to talk about? What do you want them to say? Like, I mean, it's fine if you've done everything you've always wanted to do or contributed whatever you wanted to, but if you really think about it in that morbid way, it makes everything come a little more clear. To kind of take that risk or do that thing, because there's never going to be a right time, and nobody's ever going to agree with you. If you ask 5 people, 4 people will disagree, and 1 person will support you. So I think that I had to kind of tune into the inner compass, and I think that's something that it's really hard to do.
Yeah, no, and I think it's like very cliche, but they say, like, it's not how good you are, but how great you can be. And the greatness is about everybody's gifted, right, with something, and how do you unpack that? And that's only through failures, and you have to put out 9 out of 10 times. Now, now that you're at a place where you look at failures very differently, and it's almost like you don't even think perhaps of the word failure anymore, because that's just part of life. Like 10 things work and 10 things don't, right? Where do you see this whole kind of wellness, holistic wellness, like what can be done to drive more, I would say, awareness to begin with, right? Because everybody talks about it now, right? After the pandemic, it's the buzzword.
It's cool now. Yeah. When I was in nutrition school, it was not cool at all.
Yeah.
I mean, there was one career you could do after being in nutrition school. It's called nutritionist, and it's where you work in a hospital and advise doctors on how to give IV meals through a tube for very, very ill people. And that was kind of the scope of nutrition back then. There was no how we talk about it now. But the world of wellness, now that we understand, like I'm talking to you about, not only it's about health or looking fit, it's about like productivity, happiness, having that, tuning into that gut feeling, which, they look at, there's studies that look at investors and people who have to make very quick decisions. And there's actually evidence that they use those people who make really great quick decisions are using that gut feeling. So it's not just something that, you talk about. We know intuitively, it's actually been studied that some people have a better handle on that internal signal. It's kind of like it's knowledge and wisdom and awareness that your nervous system knows before your forebrain knows. And so if you have to make on the cuff, very difficult decisions, it can be very helpful. So that just opens the world of wellness. It's not about, looking fit in a workout outfit or a bathing suit. It's about, doing the best work you can in your life, having the best relationships you can have, living the longest happy life, because we don't want to live long. We want to live healthy and long, right? So health span is more important than lifespan. And so that, I think that's where wellness is going now, is that it's not just about smoothies and shakes anymore.
Yeah, no, I think again, the word, the gut feeling, and even in the corporate world, right? I mean, like they profile leaders, like, are you an instinctive leader, right?
Yeah.
Are you an empathetic leader, or are you very kind of analytical leader? And the truth is, you need all of them.
Yeah.
But in time, especially I would say the last 2 years, like when the first lockdown happened, right? Leadership was like leveled, because nobody was a better leader than the other, because everybody was getting the same information every day, right? And that's where, the instinctive, the gut thing came in, right? I mean,
and it's also like knowing which voices to listen to and blending that with your own voice. I think that becomes that's just the most powerful and interesting parts of wellness. It's the parts where if you replace how your gut microbiome works, you can get stronger, not only physically, but mentally. So there's a new company that's looking at the gut bacteria of elite athletes, Olympic athletes, and how you can take that gut bacteria and actually improve your athletic performance. You can improve your grit and drive. That's fascinating. And you can take schizophrenic, people who have schizophrenia, and transplant that bacteria into a mouse, because they can't do it to humans. It would be unethical, but when they put it into mouse, you could tell the researchers were blinded to which mice received the transplant from the schizophrenic people, but they were able to pick it out because even the mice exhibited schizophrenia based on the gut bacterial transplant. So I think that's the future. That's the future. I mean, if we want to do the best work, we want to have the best relationships, we want to live the longest life, we have to consider this.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. So does that mean I can get that bacteria and do a Boston Marathon under 3 hours, 2.5?
Why don't you, seeking out, that's what the big question is like, now that we know that, what about highly driven people? So we know that we share bacteria with the people we spend time with. So in fact, you're not.
So what do you mean? It's a very interesting comment.
Yeah.
Because the normal side is that they say you become a byproduct of people you're surrounded with, right? So is that similar? When
you're not a byproduct of the people surrounding you. You're a byproduct of the bacterial colonies surrounding you.
Okay.
So you can. Those can be people, it can be animals, it can be nature. And we know like there's something about being in nature, for example, that increases your bacterial diversity and numbers, even though if you're not eating dirt, like it's hard to think, oh, how would that increase if you're not touching dirt?
Right.
But it's transferred. And same thing with humans. Even though we're not trying to, as you know, we can transfer viruses very easily. It's the same thing with bacteria. So I talk about this pacifier study. I don't know what they call it in England, but we call it pacifiers, the things you give to babies. Yeah. So they did a proof of concept. They showed that parents who licked their baby's pacifier. So this is a common practice if you live in Manhattan, like I lived in New York City, and if the baby drops their pacifier, I mean, you have no access to sanitizing it. You'll lick it or put some water in it or drink some water. And they found that the microbiomes of those babies were stronger because there was bacterial transfer. There were some theories about what else was happening. You know, parents transfer bacteria to their children all the time through food, through breast milk, you know.
Right.
But this was proof of concept that you can literally change someone's microbiome by being around them, sharing food with them, and licking their pacifier.
Wow. No, that's fascinating. And I think the surrounding comment you mentioned about nature and like how much little of that we do, but how much more can we do to just change the just the what you call your mood or your outlook on life, right? Because
and it's so difficult because when I went to Delhi, I traveled around the world and that was when I was just getting into this green exercise and the nature prescription, which in Canada they give a nature prescription, and they looked at me like. And
it's like you go out in nature, is that what it means?
Yeah,
like
and so the nature prescription, the study showed that it improved well-being so much so that it could not be explained by just being outdoors. And they said that there's something that we don't know yet that happens. So we think maybe it's got bacterial transfer from being outdoors. Maybe it's the stress hormones because our brains are wired differently when we go out in nature. But so when I was presenting that in cities like Delhi, and there were people who say, we do not go outside and we don't have access to green spaces, or it's not safe pollution-wise. You don't see sun for hours of the day. And so I think that we're at the crux of learning enough about this that we can build a better society, because we know that we're killing that gut-brain connection. Those gut bacteria that act as kind of army for our body are being killed. And so you can't expect us to be, that's why depression and anxiety, and that's why we can't think clearly and we're tired all the time.
Yeah, no. Very, very insightful, learnings. And I think, at least I'm glad you validate the nature.
Yeah,
and,
the nature prescription.
Nature prescription. I'm happy I just did one trek, so I feel like, okay.
Did you do it here?
No, I went to Nepal. So I did a 7-day trek.
Amazing. I did Machu Picchu, and it was
that's brilliant.
The same. It's like a life-changing experience, because spending that much time in nature is just, you see, like they say, our circadian rhythms are so strong that I think people don't realize how much it changes your mood and outlook on life. And so when you're making these decisions, like we're talking about fear-based decisions or taking risks, I think that if you are in the right state of mind, you can take those decisions. But if you're in anxious or fear-based state of mind, you can't make those big decisions.
Yeah, and my biggest learning on these treks is always like how much little do you need in life, right?
Yeah.
Because you're just climbing and you're staying in a tent and eating like basic food, and you got no phones, and it's just nature.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, that was what was so shocking to me when I first started. That's why I decided to do immunology fellowship. When they said that at the turn of the century in London, they found that at the Industrial Revolution, all these rich people who were going to London to work, their children were starting to have more illnesses like asthma, allergies, autoimmune disease, food allergies. And the doctors, there's a scientist named Dr. Strachan who said that's strange because my patients that live still in the villages outside of London don't have these issues. By far, big difference. And what we now call the hygiene hypothesis is still present today. And so it's not about hygiene, but we think it's the change of gut bacteria. When you're in a farm, when you're exposed to nature, animals, and others in your family, versus when you're in a sterile environment without a lot of interactions with others and interactions with other bacteria. And of course, there's a lot of differences that happen. The way people eat changes, the way people, have family relationships change. And so that's still the reason we think that people get autoimmune GI, inflammation-based diseases. And that was discovered in the early, turn of the century, but we're still making that same mistake almost to the extreme with the pandemic.
Yeah, I think. So let me shift to what do you do just as to keep yourself balanced and in your own center of gravity, because there's a lot, right? You're obviously a mom, you have a family, you got your profession, and then all the other things which come with it. What is your routine to keep you grounded? And
I think when we talked about circadian rhythms and gut health, that's in my mind. I keep that in the forefront instead of a nice to have. So for me, a morning routine, even if it's 2 to 5 minutes, happens whether I'm at home or traveling. That means a little bit of natural light and maybe a little bit of mindfulness. If it's an ideal day, I'll do a fasted workout. Because there's something to be said about using the glucose. There's a biology about using the glucose in your system before your first meal is ideal. It's an ideal way to train your metabolism to be flexible, and we want that. So, and then having a nighttime routine, like, turning phones and computers and dimming lights is really counterculture. You're not going to be looked at as normal when you try to do that. So it's been an exercise in saying, well, I know that that's normal is broken, right? So trying to figure out how to navigate that. So for me, that means putting the tasks that don't require my phone or computer and TV at the end of the day for the last hour. And so it could be showering, it could be getting ready for the next day, it could be journaling, reading, whatever it is. I try to think in the framework of circadian rhythms, mind-gut connection to make some decisions. And the data on gut health is very clear what you're supposed to eat and what you're supposed to not eat. And so I just try to follow a few, like one guideline I would tell anyone who, is start to eat more foods with bacteria in it. I know it sounds really strange because as the world got more modern, we learned how to preserve things.
So what would be an example?
Like yogurt with bacterial cultures.
Okay.
If you buy a traditional fruit yogurt, they often don't have bacterial cultures because now everything's pasteurized and convenient. But the way they used to make foods, fermentation was a big part of almost every culture, but now it's not because we have refrigerators and pasteurization, and so we don't need those. But that bacteria is really beneficial, and we've seen in studies, it's huge benefit. So besides, the typical don't eat as much processed food, cut down your sugar intake, is to add a few probiotic foods into your diet. So if people who don't do dairy, they can do kimchi or sauerkraut or kombucha, which are all traditionally fermented foods.
No, that's a great input. Yeah, more bacteria, which you will never think.
Yeah.
It's counterintuitive.
More bacteria.
Yeah,
it's so weird because you want that population, hunter-gatherers, still in modern times. There's a couple of tribes left in Tanzania. They live like what we presume we would have lived. They live in huts and they don't have light, and they hunt and gather and fish. They have so much. Their diversity and amount of bacteria is multitudes of times of what a modern American or modern, person has. And so we know that their bacteria, their gut microbiome is much healthier than ours. And they live in this very backward rural way. So we know that we have a long ways to go.
Great. So I think we've had. I think we'll need a couple of more episodes. There's a lot of depth into the conversation. I think more especially because I think the relevance of simplification of information, right? I think to me that's the biggest, and I think that's probably what you're trying to do is simplify very complex topics around, whether they're medical terminologies or whether they're wellness, terminologies, but how to break it down for a day-to-day use and what changes to make. So it's been a great conversation. Also, I think it's like 3 degrees of separation. Very dear friend who's a common friend, and then you got New York and Phoenix and wellness. So a lot of as you say, the gut feels of of connections, right? The 3 degrees, 2 degrees. But thank you so much for sharing these wonderful insights. I know you have you've already written the book, but there's something more interesting coming. So we'll love to have those conversations very soon. But again, good luck in keeping the content very rich and very, I would say, engaging.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge in today's world. There's so much noise out there. Who do you listen to? And everybody has, a mic. Yeah. And so either you have to be louder, or you have to do your homework. And I'm always challenged with how to get the message across clearly, accurately, and in a way that is entertaining, because everybody needs that too. No,
you're doing an awesome job. So thank you, Ami, for taking the time, and good luck to all the wonderful work you're doing. And we hope to talk to you soon on your upcoming project or projects in the near future.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Thanks.